Señores, el multimillonario Elon Musk se ha enfrentado a una ola de críticas en esta semana tras una entrevista en el Foro Económico de Qatar. No solo se puso a la defensiva sobre los resultados de este grupo DOGE, este Departamento de Eficiencia Gubernamental, que como bien sabemos él mismo ha estado liderando, sino que también silenció a una periodista comparándola con una computadora. Una conversación, amigos, que dio un giro totalmente incómodo cuando se le cuestionó sobre las promesas no cumplidas con el ahorro fiscal. Sean bienvenidos a Políticamente en Desacuerdo. Señores, hoy veremos cómo Elon Musk, furioso, insulta a una entrevistadora por atreverse a preguntar sobre su gran promesa de DOGE. Así que los invito a que se queden hasta el final de este video porque veremos los detalles más interesantes. Pues bueno, señores, cuando Elon Musk anunció su entrada en política como líder de este grupo DOGE, prometió austeridad, transparencia y ahorros sin precedentes en el gobierno, porque se supone que iba a ser eficiencia. En octubre, ante miles de personas en el Madison Square Garden, durante un mitin de Trump, aseguró que su equipo ahorraría al menos $2 billones al gobierno federal. Poco después, en lo que iba avanzando los primeros 100 días de Trump, se redujo esa cifra a la mitad, $1 billón. Y amigos, ese número ya había desaparecido. Meses después, el balance quedó claro. Apenas unos $160.000 millones ahorrados, según los reportes oficiales, cosa que él mismo confirmó. Recordemos esto.
$150 billion. Think of that.
Yeah. It's 160 now.
Yeah, 160. They said, oh, it could have been more. And a lot of stuff is being worked on. That number could be doubled and even tripled. A lot of things are being worked on that we don't count yet because it's not quite there. But you've done a fantastic job, and we appreciate it very much, Elon.
Thank you.
Un análisis reciente por parte de Financial Times incluso cuestionó si es que esos ahorros son reales o es que simplemente lo contabilizaron de forma optimista. Pero lo cierto es que de lejos de los grandes rescates financieros que él prometió, Elon Musk parece haber avanzado un poco más allá de los anuncios espectaculares, porque durante una entrevista con Michelle Hussein, editora de Bloomberg, fue directamente cuestionado sobre la brecha entre sus promesas y los resultados reales. Cito las palabras antes de mostrarles la entrevista. Ella le preguntó, ¿ha hablado de un ahorro de $4.000 millones al día? Pero si sumamos todo esto, no llegará a los 2 billones durante la vigencia de este departamento DOGE. Pues bueno, en ese momento, Elon Musk cambió de tono. Disculpe, le dijo. Y luego optó por querer evadir la pregunta con una crítica generalizada. Es como hablar con una computadora. Veamos ese momento.
You've talked about $4 billion a day being saved, but that won't get, and I think everyone can agree that combating waste and inefficiency in government is a very good thing. But if you add that up, it's not going to get to $2 trillion over the lifetime of DOGE.
I'm sorry?
The $4 billion a day, if DOGE is going to run till next July, is not going to get you to $2 trillion. But you still say it's your aim, so we'll take that as read.
There's what DOGE. I mean, I feel you're somewhat trapped in the NPC dialogue tree of a traditional journalist. So it's difficult when I'm conversing with someone who's trapped in the dialogue tree of a conventional journalist, because it's like talking to a computer. DOGE is an advisory group. We are doing the best we can as an advisory group. The progress made thus far as an advisory group is excellent. I don't think any advisory group has done better in the history of advisory groups of the government. Now, we do not make the laws, nor do we control the judiciary, nor do we control the executive branch. We are simply advisors. In that context, we are doing very well. Beyond that, we cannot we cannot take action beyond that because we are not some sort of imperial dictator of the government. There are three branches of government that are to some degree opposed to that level of cost savings. But nonetheless, let's not criticize whether there's 4 trillion, and instead look at the fact that 160 billion has been saved, and more will be saved too.
Señores, Elon Musk insiste en que Doge no tiene poder ejecutivo. Algo técnicamente cierto, ¿no? Porque su rol es asesor, supuestamente. Pero también usó esto como una excusa para justificar los escasos resultados. No hacemos las leyes ni controlamos el poder judicial ni el ejecutivo, simplemente somos asesores. Esa es en sí la excusa. Sin embargo, si bien no puede legislar, sí puede proponer reformas, sí puede identificar ineficiencias y puede generar presión política. Y amigos, yo creo que en ese frente muchos coinciden, ¿no? No ha hecho nada. No creo que ningún grupo asesor haya tenido mejor desempeño en la historia. Fue lo que él dijo, sin tener evidencia ni nada que respaldara su afirmación. Señores, para muchos expertos en gobernanza pública, esta declaración sonó más a propaganda que a realidad. Pero bueno, esa entrevista, amigos, fue mucho más larga porque tomó un rumbo totalmente diferente, más controvertido, ¿no? Sucedió exactamente cuando Musk respondió a las duras críticas de Bill Gates, quien, si es que no lo saben ustedes, Bill Gates lo acusó de matar a los niños más pobres del mundo, al querer apoyar recortes a programas de ayuda internacional. Y bueno, pues en vez de querer discutirlo, ¿no? Recurrió a un ataque personal. Afirmó lo siguiente: ¿quién se cree Bill Gates para hacer comentarios sobre el bienestar de los niños, dado que frecuentaba a Jeffrey Epstein? Amigos, la audiencia en ese momento, pues bueno, respondió con aplausos dispersos, pero Musk omitió mencionar algo clave. Él mismo visitó a Epstein en Manhattan luego de que fuese condenado por delitos sexuales contra menores. E incluso asistió a una cena exclusiva junto al financiero en 2011, años después. Veamos ese momento donde Musk prácticamente respondió a Bill Gates.
I do want to ask you about USAID and the comments that Bill Gates made the other day, and I know that you called him...
Yeah, he's a huge liar.
I know, you've said that already.
That's
I wondered...
also,
and I'm just...
Who does Bill Gates think he is to make comments about the welfare of children, given that he frequented Jeffrey Epstein?
Okay, well... He said he regrets those, and he spent a lot of his own money on philanthropy around the world over the years. My question to you is: have you looked at the data to check if he might be right that the cuts to USAID might cost millions of lives?
Yes. I'd like him to show us any evidence whatsoever that is.
Señores, la mención de Jeffrey Epstein no es casual, porque hemos visto en el pasar del tiempo que se ha convertido en una herramienta de ataque, ¿no? Que no solo Musk ha utilizado para querer desviar críticas. Al señalar las conexiones de Bill Gates con el fallecido Epstein, lo que hace es intentar deslegitimar cualquier crítica, ¿no?, hacia su persona. Pero sabemos que este tipo de argumentos tienen un precio, y es erosionar el debate público, convertirlo en una rumorología, usar un pasado oscuro como escudo. Y es lo que han hecho varios. Recientemente igual el director del FBI, Kash Patel, lo mencionó y lo único que ha hecho es prácticamente sacar el pasado de Trump. DOGE, este departamento de eficiencia gubernamental, originalmente fue presentado como un golpe de eficiencia, ¿no? De austeridad. Y ha terminado siendo visto por muchos como una campaña de relaciones públicas, más que como una verdadera reforma gubernamental. Y bueno, mientras tanto, los recortes reales siguen generando preocupación en sectores muy vulnerables dentro y fuera de los Estados Unidos. Pues bueno amigos, pasemos al siguiente tema, porque quiero que hablemos un poco sobre este proyecto de ley que es tendencia en este momento por parte de los republicanos, y quiero que veamos qué es lo que incluye este proyecto de ley. Donald Trump en este momento se presenta como el gran defensor del Medicaid. Recordemos, él en estos últimos días ha dicho que no hay que tocar el Medicaid, pero que el Congreso es republicano, que Medicaid, un programa que ayuda a millones de personas con bajos ingresos a poder tener una cobertura médica, va a ser recortado. Aquí existe un problema. Mientras él dice una cosa, su partido está empujando este proyecto para recortar miles de millones de dólares. Y no solo eso, ¿no? Actualmente hay una fractura dentro del propio partido. Entonces, ¿Trump está siendo incoherente, cínico o simplemente está tratando de quedar bien con todo el mundo? Quiero que escuchemos un fragmento de esta nota para poder entender un poco mejor esto y volvemos con el tema, ¿ok?
Let's go right to NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, NBC's Julie Sirkin at the Capitol, and congressional reporter for The Hill, Michael Schnell. Julie, despite the partisan bickering on this overnight session, things are moving forward. Where are we in this process?
They're moving forward, Anna, but not nearly as fast enough in the direction that Mike Johnson wants them to move. And that is because it seems like with those changes that they made overnight that you alluded to appease the moderates, I'm talking about the state and local tax deduction, raising that cap that was only put in place during the 2017 tax cuts signed into law by President Trump. Because that cap has now moved up, the offer on the table to $40,000 for those making under $500,000 a year in New York and California and those blue states where Republicans, of course, are able to make that House majority happen. Because of that, you have hardliners who are saying this bill just got worse overnight. You have two of them who sit on the Rules Committee. That is why when you heard some of the Democrats talk about those backroom negotiations that are happening, that's actually Speaker Johnson trying to back channel and talk with Chip Roy, with Ralph Norman, two folks who at this point, at this juncture, are no's. But it's not just them, right? It's also Andy Harris, the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, and Speaker Johnson saying moments ago that not only are they not going to put this bill on the floor guaranteed today, but now it's just a chance that they do that, Anna.
It doesn't sound very optimistic in terms of what's happening in this moment. Michael, we mentioned only 3 Republicans can vote no. And so Speaker Johnson has to keep pretty much his entire caucus in line to go along to get this passed. What are you hearing about related to the holdouts right now?
Yeah, well, certainly now there are far more than just 3 Republicans who are against this bill. And if it were put on the floor within the next 5 minutes, they're saying that they would vote no. The main qualm, one of them right now, as Julie pointed out, is the fact that Speaker Johnson overnight struck an agreement with those moderate Republicans from high tax blue states on the SALT deduction cap, raising it to $40,000 for individuals making $500,000 or less. The only problem with that is that it may be an agreement among the moderates, but the hardliners are showing that they don't want to get on board. Andy Harris, the chairman of the conservative House Freedom Caucus, was on television earlier today and said that he is not happy with that deduction cap. He thinks that a number of conservatives are now opposed to where things stand because that cap was increased. So these are the dynamics that Johnson's been having to grapple with for weeks now, not just on this bill, but on all legislative undertakings. It's weighing those concerns among moderates, as Julie mentioned, the majority makers, people whose seats in purple districts are really the reason why Republicans have the majority, in addition to hardline Republicans who know how to make noise and they like to make noise. In terms of these holdouts, I spoke to Congressman Chip Roy, he Republican from Texas, just a few minutes ago. He was actually leaving that House Rules Committee meeting that you're showing right now on the screen. He told me things are, quote, not good right now. And when I asked if he's supportive, he said, I'm a no.
I have a feeling there are people out there saying, what is up with this SALT tax? Like, it's not something that I'm real familiar with, because the people in the Northeast are certainly familiar with it, but it's not something that is a big deal for other people in other states. So just for those viewers who are with us right now, it's the state and local tax. And people used to be able to deduct like the entirety of their property taxes from their tax returns as they're going through the process of filing those returns. The trouble is they can't do that all the way in some cases. And so it's right now capped at $10,000, which sounds like a lot for people, but we know in the Northeast it can be tens of thousands of dollars that people are paying in property taxes. So just trying to reiterate, that's why it's such a huge sticking point for some of these important Republican votes right now. Garrett, how confident is the White House that, after the president's meeting with House Republicans, this is going to pass? Is he doing anything more to try to get it across the finish line?
Anna, I've asked that question today. I think it's likely we'll probably see the president make phone calls to individual members, because that is what has been the kind of key to unlocking support for several other votes along the way during this administration. The White House is confident, they're always confident, that they can ultimately lean on enough Republicans to get these things across this first finish line. Remember, this is nowhere close to the end of the road for this bill. But if you look back at things like the Speaker's vote and some of these other difficult votes along the way, you've ultimately had the president, sometimes while the votes are open, calling individual members to lean on them to vote yes. They have been successful in those tactics up until this point. There's always a sort of a counterfactual moment that happens along the way in administrations. But, I covered the Hill for a long time before moving over here. These things always take longer than leadership and then the White House would like. But the president has one tool at his disposal with these big reconciliation bills. This is essentially everything that all of these Republicans ran on in 2024, and for the House in particular, hope to run on again in 2026, and they cannot end up with nothing to show for it. And so I think the White House's view is that this will ultimately get to a good place, but it may take longer than they'd like.
Julie, let's talk more about what's in the bill. Trillions in tax cuts, billions in cuts to healthcare spending, food assistance, clean energy, an increase in defense and immigration spending, the promised no tax on tips policy, and much, much more. Which of these provisions are more or less set in stone on the House side, at least for now?
Well, I would say all of them are set in stone, minus SALT, minus Medicaid, and minus the clean energy tax credits, which are the biggest parts of this bill. And that is because when it comes to Medicaid, for example, we reported yesterday that President Trump told Republicans behind closed doors, don't F around with Medicaid, stop touching it. And that is because hardliners, including a group of them that just passed moments ago and entered the Speaker's office, want more reforms. They want federal governments to, in some cases, help states less when it comes to the expanded version of Medicaid. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that this could lead to millions of Americans losing their health care coverage when it comes to clean energy tax credits. For example, moderates are also worried about that because a lot of these projects already started in their districts, and now they're going to see that potentially go backwards. So a lot still to figure out here. Speaker Johnson wants to vote on this later tonight. He's got to get moving.
And Michael, this bill could have major economic impacts. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office finds as soon as 2027, this bill would worsen financial conditions for the bottom 10% of households and increase finances for the top 10% of households. Pocketbook issues, that was a top priority for voters. Are Republicans not expecting political blowback if this passes?
Well, Anna, interestingly enough, this was one of the dynamics that we had been following in the Capitol in recent days. The question of, would Republicans vote on this bill without first having that report from the Congressional Budget Office? Now, we sort of had bits and pieces of the CBO's report on this bill. It's a sprawling piece of legislation, more than 1,000 pages, but we're starting to get a clearer picture of what this legislation would actually do, what impact it would have in the years to come. Now, Democrats are surely going to seize on this and use this as a campaigning tactic as we head into 2026. We've already seen that. In fact, Democrats latching on to some of the CBO's predictions about how many millions of Americans would lose their Medicaid coverage if the provisions of this bill would go into effect. We're also likely to see some Republicans talk about some parts, specifically the impact on the deficit. Hardline Republicans have said it's their red line that they won't support a bill unless it's deficit deficit neutral or deficit reducing, some of these numbers in the CBO report could turn them off. Though I will say Republicans do have a track record of sometimes saying that they don't believe the numbers from the CBO.
That's a good point. And Garrett, Julie just mentioned President Trump apparently warned Republicans, do not mess with Medicaid. But this CBO says the bill will cut hundreds of billions of dollars, not only from Medicaid, but also Medicare. How's the White House defending that?
Yeah, look, I mean, the White House's argument here is that they're essentially returning Medicaid to what it was meant to be, health care for the poorest and most vulnerable among us, and that by instituting these work requirements, they are fixing Medicaid, not cutting Medicaid. I think by any, standard understanding of the English language, that's just spin. I mean, the president would like to be quoted saying that he's urging people not to touch Medicaid, but the numbers are the numbers, and the projections of millions of people losing coverage cannot be ignored, no matter how you try to shape the conversation, let's say, to your liking on it.
Ok amigos, aquí tenemos una joyita, porque por un lado tenemos a Trump que les dice a los republicanos, oigan, no se les ocurra meter mano al Medicaid. Y por el otro lado su partido, el mismo que supuestamente él controla, ¿no?, como líder de facto, está impulsando un paquete legislativo que no va a meter mano, que le va a meter tijera al Medicaid, al Medicare y varios programas sociales. Entonces, ¿qué está pasando aquí? Esto no solo es una contradicción, esto es una estrategia. Donald Trump quiere quedar bien con la base más vulnerable. Especialmente, y lógicamente, hablamos de adultos mayores, personas que son de bajos ingresos, los que en teoría dependen del Medicaid. Pero al mismo tiempo, no quiere enfrentarse al ala dura de su partido. Los que exigen recortes para reducir el déficit. Bueno, o al menos para aparentar, ¿no?, que les importa el déficit. Entonces, ese es el punto clave. Esto es un teatro político. Mientras dicen que quieren reformar el Medicaid, lo que realmente están haciendo es quitar acceso a la salud a millones de personas. Todo esto bajo el pretexto de que hay que volver a lo que el Medicaid era originalmente. Eso para ellos suena bonito, pero en la práctica, amigos, es sencillo de explicar. Significa eliminar expansiones que han permitido a millones de personas vulnerables a poder acceder a un sistema de salud. ¿Y saben qué es lo más irónico? Que todo esto lo están haciendo con el argumento de que así se ayuda a los más pobres. Al parecer ahora ayudar a los pobres es quitarle cobertura médica a los más vulnerables. Hay quienes tal vez podrían argumentar, bueno, Trump está tratando de contener a los radicales del Congreso, que él no tiene el control total. Pero señores, si tú eres el líder de tu partido, si te están citando como la voz a seguir y tu gente igual aprueba los recortes, entonces significa que no tienes el control, o al menos que no te importa realmente. Y ambas opciones son preocupantes. Así que sí, señores, Trump puede decir lo que quiera frente a las cámaras, pero mientras su partido avanza con políticas que perjudican directamente a los mismos votantes que según él quiere proteger, sus palabras no valen nada. Este proyecto de ley no es solo un montón de cifras, son decisiones que pueden quitarle la salud a millones de personas, especialmente a los más vulnerables. Y eso no se tapa con ningún discurso bonito. Pero bueno, ¿qué opinan ustedes, amigos? ¿Creen que Trump realmente quiere proteger al Medicaid? ¿O que solo está cuidando su imagen sin importarle las consecuencias? Los invito a que me dejen sus opiniones en la caja de comentarios. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme hasta el final. Recuerda, dale like al video, compártelo con tus amigos y suscríbete a nuestro canal Políticamente en Desacuerdo. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.